I'm a rookie paparazzi. To get a big scoop, I spent a solid 6 months tailing Chris, the newest A-lister. But I never got him. I only managed to find his rumored son. His son was in elementary school, so I followed him. His son fell, and I helped him up. His son wanted cotton candy, so I paid for it. Later, some paparazzi thought I was the kid's mom, and it went viral. I quickly clarified, I'm not. Unexpectedly, Chris himself replied to me, you are. That night, the internet exploded. I'm a paparazzi, pretty new to the game. But as the saying goes, either you're a nobody, or you make a big splash. And I chose to quietly prepare to make a big splash. So, out of all the celebrities, I picked Chris, the newest A-lister. Sitting in my rented used car, I looked over Chris's file. Chris, 28, spent the last few years studying abroad. After returning, he gained tons of fans thanks to his killer looks and amazing acting skills. He's had almost no scandals since he debuted, but there are rumors he's secretly married with a kid, though nothing's confirmed. Could a guy with 2 legs really be this perfect these days? I didn't buy it. So, I diligently staked out Chris's apartment building for a few months. But for months on end, I didn't even see his shadow, though I sure spent a lot of money. Just as I was munching on some bread, I looked up, and my eyes lit up. Someone was coming out of the apartment building. Could it be Chris? I quickly hid, watching a young man come out with a little kid. The little boy looked about 7 or 8, with fluffy black hair. He was too far away to see his face clearly. But the rumors immediately came to mind, and I couldn't help but feel a thrill of excitement. Could this be Chris's son? Afraid of being spotted, I slouched down in my car, staying completely still. The young man was holding something, and he called out casually to the little boy, Gary, if you don't eat, you'll go to school hungry, you know. The boy, called Gary, didn't even look at him and just walked off with his head down. He was walking towards my car. As he got closer, I could see the little boy's tense face. Though young, he was adorable, like a perfectly carved cherub. Hey, seriously, what's with this kid? Even Chris isn't this difficult, the young man grumbled, catching up and easily scooping up Gary. Let's go, taking you to school. Hearing the name Chris, my internal radar went off. Seeing the two of them get into another car, I thought for a moment. And decisively followed them. This was a major breakthrough. If I'd found Chris's son, was I far from getting a scoop on Chris himself? I tailed their car all the way to a nearby elementary school and watched the little guy go inside. I figured, maybe the kid's mom would pick him up after school. That would be a huge story. I was all in, waiting from morning till dusk. I waited until elementary school students started trickling out. By then, the school gate was already crowded with parents waiting to pick up their kids, all anxiously looking out. I wasn't a parent, but I was just as eager. Until I saw that familiar little figure from the morning appear in the crowd. Gary, with his backpack on, stood at the school gate, his clear, dark eyes scanning the crowd. When he didn't see anyone he knew, his eyelids drooped slightly, looking a bit dejected. After standing there for a moment, he tried to squeeze through the crowd. But a parent standing in front of him spotted their own child and, in a rush to get past him, bumped into him hard. The little guy was looking down at the ground and, caught off guard, was knocked to the ground. My gaze froze. No. How did he fall? Seeing the parents all pushing and shoving, afraid he'd get stepped on, I quickly pushed open my car door and got out. I ran over to the little guy in a few steps and reached out to help him up. You okay? Hearing my voice, Gary, who had landed right on his butt, looked up. His eyes met mine, he pursed his lips, and after letting me help him stand, he slowly mumbled, "Who are you?" His voice was sweet and childlike, really cute. I automatically brushed the dust off his clothes. Hearing his question, it suddenly dawned on me that my behavior was indeed a bit odd. I awkwardly explained, I'm a fan of your dad's. Fans follow Chris. Paparazzi do too. Not that different, right? But to avoid being mistaken for a bad person, I added, "Kiddo, you should go stand by your teacher, okay? Make sure you only go home with someone you know." With that, I hurried back to my car, feeling a bit annoyed with myself. Ugh, why couldn't I just hold back? I totally tipped them off. Once that young guy from the morning shows up, he's definitely going to realize something's up and chase me away. I stared blankly up at the sky, feeling down. But out of a sense of responsibility, I still waited until I saw the man from the morning come and pick Gary up before driving off. I fully expected to receive a warning from Chris's assistant or his agency that night. After all, I'd heard that Chris didn't exactly have the best temper. Apparently, a paparazzo who followed him relentlessly before really ticked him off, and now that guy has completely vanished from the paparazzi scene. But surprisingly, I waited until I fell asleep and still hadn't heard anything. I even wondered if Chris was too engrossed in filming to know what happened. But at least I'd dodged a bullet. Cautiously, yet boldly, I continued my stakeout near the apartment building. Every day, I watched little Gary leave for school and then saw him come home. A few times, I wasn't sure if it was my imagination, but I felt like the little guy glanced in my direction several times. The young man, however, seemed completely oblivious. Until one morning. Yawning, I opened the chicken soup dumplings I'd bought and sat in my car, ready to eat while keeping an eye on Gary, when I saw the little guy come out of the house alone. The young man, who was usually glued to his side holding some unknown thing, was nowhere to be seen. I blinked. Surely, they weren't going to let the little guy go to school by himself? That thought had barely crossed my mind, when someone suddenly knocked on my car window a few times. I instinctively rolled down the window and found myself face to face with a cute little kid. In the sunlight, the little guy's eyes were a bit light-colored, his eyelashes were long, and his face still had some baby fat, making him look adorable. He lowered his eyelashes, looking rather pitiful, and said, "Pretty lady, can you take me to school? My uncle overslept today, and I can't wake him up." I was dumbfounded. Huh? Wait. You want me, a paparazzo, to take you to school? I blinked, wondering if I was still half asleep and hallucinating. Seriously, does that even make sense? But the little guy in front of me was completely oblivious, still staring at me with puppy dog eyes. If I'm any later, I'm going to be late. He was incredibly cute, and the way his voice trailed off with such innocence just melted your heart. Looking at the boy with his little backpack, an idea struck me. I pulled out my phone, pointed it at him, and coaxed, "Sweetie, could you say that again? Just say that you asked me to take you to school, okay? Even though I'm not exactly a model citizen who helps old ladies cross the street against a red light, wait, no, I mean at a crosswalk, I'm just trying to make a living, not end up in jail." Seeing this, Gary's little face looked a bit stunned, but he quickly understood and said with a serious expression, "It was me who asked the lady to take me to school." That settled it. I put my phone away, got out of the car, opened the back door, watched him get in, buckled his seatbelt, and then returned to the driver's seat, driving smoothly towards the magnet school he attended. While waiting at a red light, I glanced at the soup dumplings I'd bought earlier and hadn't had a chance to eat, licking my lips. I reached for them, just about to take a bite, when out of the corner of my eye, I saw those big, dark, glistening eyes in the back. The little guy was sitting primly in his seat, lips pursed, but his gaze was glued to my soup dumplings. My adult politeness kicked in, and I casually asked, "Sweetie, did you eat breakfast before you left?" Hearing this, Gary's eyes drooped, and he mumbled, "No." Seeing him like that, I hesitated for a moment, then, steeling myself against the pain, I handed him the soup dumplings. "Want some soup dumplings then?" At my words, the little guy's eyes lit up. He took the bag of dumplings from my hand, perhaps a bit embarrassed, as the tips of his fair ears turned a little red. He said softly, "Lady, did you buy these especially for me? You're so much nicer than my uncle. His cooking is terrible." I didn't really catch what he was muttering, but I managed to tear my longing eyes away from that bag of soup dumplings and replied distractedly, "Uh-huh." But soon, the rich aroma of chicken broth filled the entire car. I was even hungrier. But I couldn't let a kid go hungry. About 10 minutes later, the car pulled up in front of the elementary school. "We're here." I watched Gary get out of the car, but after taking a few steps, he suddenly turned back. Confused, I instinctively glanced at the back seat. He didn't leave anything behind, did he? Just as that thought flashed through my mind, the little boy walked back towards me, staring straight at me. "Lady, will you pick me up this afternoon too?" Of course, not. But looking into his expectant eyes, I just couldn't bring myself to say no. I stammered for a while, then weakly nodded. Oh, man. Who could say no to a kid who's cute, well-behaved, and calls you lady? Almost the instant he heard my answer, Gary's eyes sparkled like stars. Then it's a deal. After he went into the school, I put my hands on the steering wheel, about to turn around and go buy another breakfast, when it hit me. Wait a minute. I'm just a paparazzo. I haven't even gotten a single piece of dirt on Chris, and instead, I'm helping him babysit. Damn you, Chris. Pay up. But despite my grumbling, when school let out, I was dutifully there at the school gate. Working for free, basically. Talk about being a workhorse. No, wait, I'm playing the long game here. At the school gate, when the bell rang, a swarm of elementary school kids poured out. This time I was prepared. As soon as Gary popped his head out, I waved at him. In the crowd, the little guy's eyes lit up, and he quickly scampered towards me. Lady. My heart suddenly softened, and my original plan to wait with him for his uncle completely vanished. Anyway, once is a fluke, twice is a habit. Since there were many parents picking up their kids, all the nearby parking spots were full. My car was parked a bit further away. As I walked with Gary in that direction, we passed some street vendors. There were people selling fried skewers, sugar paintings, cotton candy, and candied fruit. I'd pretty much eaten all that stuff to death after becoming an adult, so I wasn't very interested now. But out of the corner of my eye, I noticed Gary staring intently at a cotton candy vendor. My eyes flickered. His dad is so busy, he probably doesn't have much time to spend with him. A kid that age might have never even had cotton candy. Thinking of this, I barely hesitated before buying the biggest cotton candy I could find and handing it to Gary. Here, eat up. Gary, who had already looked away, stared blankly at the cotton candy in front of him, then at me, and finally, his gaze went past me to somewhere behind me. Confused, I smiled. What's wrong? The moment I finished speaking, I heard the boy in front of me happily call out to someone behind me, Dad. After a brief moment of shock, I quickly turned around and saw a man wearing a hat and a mask, only his refined eyes and eyebrows visible. I recognized him as Chris in an instant. But that wasn't the point right now. My gaze fell on his phone screen, which was displaying an emergency call number. Help me. This is a huge misunderstanding. I rushed over, trying to explain, but I was too anxious. My left foot tripped my right, and I ended up stumbling into his arms. He instinctively thought I was trying to escape and grabbed my wrist tightly to prevent me from running. A warm sensation spread from my wrist. If I were really his fan, I'd probably be screaming. But unfortunately, I was a paparazzo, and a caught one at that. I looked up at him, met his cold, sharp eyes, and my bravado instantly deflated. I didn't know how to explain, so I could only say lamely, Chris, I'm a good person. But I regretted it as soon as the words left my mouth. What kind of bad guy would admit they're a bad guy? Chris's expression was cold and stern, a thin, chilly smile playing on his lips. He was about to say something, but when he saw my face clearly, he suddenly froze. His grip on my hand loosened. I was able to pull my hand back and quickly tried to signal to a dumbfounded Gary beside me to help explain. But that clueless kid, Gary, didn't understand. After his eyes darted back and forth between me and Chris, he clutched the cotton candy in his hand, blinked innocently, and said, Lady, I don't have any money. How about this, I'll give you this, Dad. He's got a nice face. What do you mean, this dad? I found it strangely odd, but I couldn't dwell on that unsettling feeling right now. I racked my brain, trying to think of something to say. But the more anxious you get, the blanker your mind becomes. In the end, I could only manage a dry laugh. Might as well just laugh it off. Seeing that staying longer might lead to him being recognized, he turned his head to me and said, rather helplessly, "Let's get in the car first." I didn't quite react at first and just dazedly followed him into the car. It wasn't until he started the car that I realized. I have my own car. Why did I get into his car? The scenery outside the window kept receding. This thought was quickly suppressed as my professional instincts took over my brain. Doesn't this count as being in the right place at the right time? I'm not far from getting a big scoop. Filled with excitement, I couldn't help but sneak glances at Chris's profile. After getting in the car, he took off his hat and mask. His face was clearly a masterpiece of creation, a full forehead, long, deep-set almond eyes, eyelashes that fluttered like butterfly wings, a high nose bridge, and lips that were neither too thin nor too thick, with corners slightly upturned, as if he were in a good mood. Just as I was wondering if he naturally had a smiling lip, the person who had been looking straight ahead suddenly turned his head. Caught off guard, our eyes met. His eyes were deep and held a fatal attraction, as if they could suck your very soul in. I was a bit dazed from looking, my heart felt like it skipped a beat, and I suddenly felt that I had seen such a pair of eyes before. But this thought was fleeting. How could a rookie paparazzi like me and a top celebrity like him have ever met? It was probably an illusion from looking at too many of his photos. Are you a reporter? Suddenly, a cool, detached voice sounded by my ear. I followed his gaze to the press pass peeking out of my pocket and paused. It turned out that when I got into the car earlier, I hadn't noticed, and my press pass had partially slipped out of my pocket. When I looked up again, the man's expression was unreadable, his eyes holding an emotion I couldn't understand. A fine sweat broke out on my back. Paparazzi, tailing his son. The breath I had just let out not long ago hitched again, and my heart, suspended in mid-air, felt like a punching bag that had just taken a hit, spinning in circles. Only one thought echoed in my mind, I'm screwed. I wanted to jump out of the car, but on the surface, I remained as cool as a cucumber. No, this is my friend's. She left it at my place. Rumor had it that Chris hated paparazzi prying into his private life. But countless paparazzi still threw themselves at him, hoping to get a big scoop. I was an ordinary person, one of them. I thought Chris would be suspicious, but surprisingly, as soon as I said it, he believed me. Oh, I see. In the back seat, Gary, who was happily munching on cotton candy, chimed in enthusiastically, by the way, she's your fan, you know. Hearing this, Chris spared me another glance, his voice rising at the end, is that so? His voice was very pleasant, and since he was so close, my ears inexplicably started to burn. I began to babble, yes. Admitting to being a fan was better than being thrown out of the car. Suddenly, I heard a light chuckle. I instinctively looked up and saw the man's lips curve into a smile, but he quickly suppressed it and uttered a few words, I don't believe you. You don't follow celebrities. My eyes widened. How did he know? How could he tell? My brain short-circuited, and I stubbornly argued, I do now. Okay. What did he mean by that? But Chris clearly had no intention of explaining and directly took Gary and me back to his place. Walking into the apartment I'd been staking out for months, I still felt like I was dreaming. The apartment wasn't as luxurious as I'd imagined. It had a minimalist style. There were no posters or photos of him hanging around either. Gary and I sat together on the sofa. We just watched as Chris rolled up the sleeves of his black shirt. His arms had smooth lines, exuding a powerful charisma. He glanced over slightly, his expression calm as he asked, what do you want to eat? It's dinner time. I unconsciously swallowed. No wonder he has so many fans, he really is handsome. This physique, this face. And he can cook. Put it all together, and it's a lethal combination. But I wasn't conceited enough to think he was asking what I wanted to eat. I turned to look at little Gary next to me, who was still battling the cotton candy. The little boy mumbled something and then politely asked me, "What do you like to eat, lady?" "Dad's a really good cook." "This kid, he's just too adorable." I resisted the urge to plant a kiss on his little cheek and said to Chris, I'm fine with anything. I'm not a picky eater." Hearing this, the man nodded slightly and turned into the semi-open kitchen. While he was opening the fridge to get ingredients, I couldn't resist. I pulled out my phone and secretly snapped a few pictures of him. Getting photos of an A-lister cooking, it's like all my hard work has finally paid off. After taking the pictures, seeing that Chris hadn't noticed, I quickly put my phone away and pretended nothing had happened. However, I didn't notice that the man, who was slicing tomatoes, raised an eyebrow slightly, a helpless smile escaping his lips. How could anyone think an entertainer wouldn't notice a camera? During dinner, I was surprised to find that most of the dishes on the table were my favorites. Scrambled eggs with tomatoes, sweet and sour pork ribs, fish-flavored shredded pork, and a salad. I was wolfing down my food. Across from me, Chris ate with great elegance. Up close, his eyelashes were long and his features were stunning. A phrase flashed through my mind. Good enough to eat. Gary, on the other hand, looked like he was having the best meal of his life. His little mouth barely stopped moving as he mumbled, "Before, it was always, steak salad, salad steak. Finally, something delicious." I didn't pay much attention. After dinner, Chris kindly asked if I wanted him to drive me home, but I quickly refused. Seriously, him, an entertainer, driving me, a paparazzo, home? That would turn things upside down. However, thinking about how he treated me like a kind fan, I inexplicably felt a pang of guilt. He actually seemed like a pretty good guy. Forget it. I should probably switch to someone else. When I got home, I washed up and lay in bed. Just as I was about to research which celebrity to follow next, my phone suddenly rang. It was my boss from the agency, Hannah. Why was she calling me so late? Confused, I picked up the phone and said casually, "Hannah." The next moment, I heard the woman on the other end of the line speak rapidly, "Judy, have you seen the trending topics? They say they photographed Chris's son with a woman, looking intimate, suspected to be Chris's secret wife. I think that person looks like you." "What? Me? How is that possible?" I thought it was ridiculous. I switched out of the call screen and clicked on the trending topic to see. When I saw the photos in the trending topic clearly, I was thunderstruck, completely stunned. There were 3 photos in total. They showed me helping Gary up at the elementary school gate, me getting out of the car that morning to let Gary in, and the last one, Gary walking towards me after school this afternoon. The person who leaked the photos even thoughtfully blurred out my license plate number. A little bit of conscience, but not much. How could I, someone who drives a used car, possibly be Chris's wife? Which clueless colleague took these random shots? Getting caught up in my own gossip. I was completely speechless. But people in the comments section were discussing it heatedly. Is it true? Didn't they already debunk the rumors that Chris doesn't have a wife and kids? Now that they have pictures of a woman and a child, shouldn't that be solid proof? LOL, just any kid and woman are called brothers, wife and child. Isn't that too ridiculous? Still supporting brothers' new drama. That car looks pretty beat up. If she's really Chris's wife, would she drive such a crappy car? Forget it, not believable. I think it's possible. Cars get old after a while. Looking at the side profile, the woman looks quite pretty. My mind was a mess. Luckily, neither Gary nor I were facing the camera directly in the photos. I only had a side profile, and Gary was just a back view. So I said firmly, "Hannah, it's not me. I don't know who's stirring up trouble. I've been staking him out for months and haven't seen his wife." Hearing this, Hannah was clearly a bit disappointed but didn't say anything more. I breathed a sigh of relief and hung up the phone. But before I could fully exhale, my finger twitched, and the page refreshed. And I saw that a gossip account had dug up my ex handle. It only had a few old photos of Chris that I'd saved. Oh right, and the photo I just posted today of him cooking. My previously quiet account was suddenly flooded with a large group of fans. Wow, sis, are you really Chris's wife? I thought it was just gossip accounts making stuff up, but this sis's account only has Chris's photos. She followed Chris years ago, and there's even a picture of him cooking. This must be true love. Bro, you hid her really well. I looked at the last comment, a little surprised. Honestly, I'd forgotten when I even started following Chris. But that wasn't important right now. Seeing things blow up, I quickly replied, I'm not. After that comment was posted. Although some of Chris's fans still didn't believe it, that was all I could do. Deny it immediately. That should be fine, right? After a long day out, I put down my phone. I only researched other celebrities' information for a few minutes before I crashed and fell asleep. When I woke up the next day, I instinctively reached for my phone to check the time, but after pressing it for a while, the screen remained black. It must have died. I yawned, found my charger, plugged my phone in, and shuffled off in my slippers to wash up. I slowly came back to a chorus of ding 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 notifications. My eyelid twitched violently, and a wave of unease washed over me for no reason. When I picked up my phone, the first thing I saw was a message from Hannah. Judy, don't come to the office for a while. Your salary will be paid out to you. I froze for a moment, feeling like my world was collapsing. I wake up from a nap to find out I'm fired? I hurriedly clicked on the trending topics to check, and sure enough, yesterday's incident was still brewing. In the middle of the night, a female celebrity also posted on X, could certain female paparazzi please stay away from celebrities' lives? It was Jessica, the actress currently filming with Chris, who was trying to stir up a ship with him. One stone stirred up 1,000 waves. Paired with my clarification yesterday, I'm not. The originally harmonious comments section instantly collapsed. WTF, I thought she was the real sister-in-law, turns out it's just some paparazzi stunt. Go to hell, damn paparazzi, how dare you sneak pictures of brother cooking. So disgusting. I found out, her name is Judy, she's from XX Company. The more I think about it, the scarier it is. She even stalked Chris's son, not even sparing a child. A flood of negative comments poured in, like a tidal wave, almost drowning me. I was furious. What kind of paparazzi ends up like me? I might as well quit and become a nanny. Just as I was about to retort, a call suddenly came in. Another unknown number. My mind was a mess, and I subconsciously answered. On the other end, a man's cold voice said, Judy, I think we need to meet. Someone seemed to be talking next to him. Chris, the lawyer has already been found, just waiting to file the lawsuit. For this kind of malicious person, we should crack down hard and make her pay. Chris casually hummed in agreement, then immediately directed the conflict towards me. When are you free? My heart sank. Sitting in the private room we had agreed on. I was on pins and needles. I kept replaying the excuses I had prepared in my mind, and even watched the video of Gary I recorded earlier several times on the way here to make sure there were no issues, before finally letting out a breath. Before long, footsteps approached from outside the private room. The heart I had just calmed down started to race again, thumping wildly in my chest. The footsteps got closer. Until they stopped at the door. A hand pushed the door open. My heart was practically in my throat, and I stared intently at the doorway. The door was pushed open. A tall figure appeared in my field of vision. Compared to the lazy demeanor Chris had at home, the man now looked quite serious. My gaze swept past him, looking behind him. Where's the lawyer? Seeing this, Chris's eyebrows twitched slightly. He closed the door behind him and walked towards me. I was a bit confused, but then I thought. He probably wants to try the soft approach before getting tough. I get how this works. So I didn't waste any words, unlocked my phone, and handed it to him. Here. My meaning was clear, let him check it himself. I didn't take any inappropriate pictures. Hearing this, Chris's gaze flickered, a hint of some emotion flashing in his eyes. After taking my phone, he did something with it, then placed it back on the table and cleared his throat, resting his hand on his chin. All right. That fast? I took my phone back and opened the photo album to check. Not a single photo had been deleted. That video was still there too. And it was only a minute or two. I didn't hear anything. Did he even watch it? But he said it was all right. What was all right? I was completely confused, but I didn't notice anything wrong at the time. I hesitated and said, well, I'll be going then. As soon as I said that, the person in front of me seemed to freeze. He clasped his hands on the table and stared at me intently. Judy, you really don't remember me at all? Did we know each other before? I wanted to ask that, but I had a gut feeling that saying it might upset him. I bit my lip, unsure how to respond. Seeing my expression, Chris met my gaze for a moment, sighed lightly, and pulled a photo out of his pocket, handing it to me. Here, this is a picture we took together that year. Back then, you even told me you hoped I'd become a star and you'd be my manager. Now I've made it, and you've completely forgotten. My gaze dropped. It was an old photo, taken over a decade ago, its edges already yellowed. The river of time rushed on relentlessly, yet in this moment, it brought me back to that summer. Ryan, you're last again. Do you only grow taller and not smarter? A burst of laughter erupted in the classroom. The 15 or 16-year-old boy was so scolded by the teacher in front of everyone that he couldn't lift his head. After the teacher finished scolding him, he slumped back onto his desk, looking unconcerned. I looked at the 90 written on my own test paper, silently covered the score, glanced at the gloomy-looking boy beside me, thought for a moment, and comforted him. Actually, being tall is also very useful. I heard that he actually had good grades when he first started school, but later, something happened, and he stopped wanting to study, just letting himself go. Hearing this, Ryan lifted his eyes to look at me and said faintly, really? I said, of course, height is genetic, but grades can be improved through effort. Hearing this, a short boy in the front seat quietly got a little triggered. Seeing this, the boy chuckled softly, the gloom in his eyes dissipating, as if tiny specks of light were sparkling. Judy, you're actually quite interesting. I struck while the iron was hot. So, if you try a little harder, you can definitely do it. After that, we discussed math together. Most of the time I was talking, and he was listening. He went to play basketball, and I went to watch. One winter day, he had a high fever and slept slumped over his desk, but no one cared. I noticed something was wrong and dragged him to the school clinic during the break. His face was flushed red from the fever, his vision a bit blurry, and he murmured, Judy. Afraid he'd become delirious from the fever, I coaxed him like a child, take your medicine and get a good sleep. You'll be fine when you wake up. He was still looking at me. Until graduation year, on the day we took our graduation photos together. The young man suddenly leaned in and whispered to me, hey, Judy, what if we don't end up in the same school and can't see each other anymore? I blinked, looking at the handsome face so close to mine, and joked, that's okay. There's still a long life ahead. How about you become a celebrity in the future? That way, I can see you every day. As if he didn't expect me to say that, he chuckled. Then you'll be my manager? I casually agreed, sure. Those casual words spoken back then had long been forgotten in some corner of my memory. Little did I know, he had kept them in his heart. In the photo, in front of the camera. The young man had his head tilted, staring intently at me. The summer breeze from that day seemed to brush against my face again across the years. The boy who was once scolded by the teacher until he couldn't lift his head was now shining brightly. Just like back then. Gazing at me with burning intensity. My cheeks inexplicably felt hot, and I started to argue unreasonably, you changed your name. How was I supposed to remember? Actually, forget the name. After more than 10 years, who would remember what their deskmate from their youth looked like? Hearing my words, Chris's expression turned dejected. Yes, it's my fault. I inexplicably felt a bit sorry for him. Actually, it's not entirely your fault. Just consider me blind. After quickly saying that, my sanity finally returned. But what should we do now? Chris's eyes flickered, and he was about to speak. But I interrupted him. Oh right, who is your wife? Why don't you make it public? How about you give me the exclusive scoop? Since we're old friends, it's naturally much easier to talk about anything. As long as it's said that Chris agreed to let me break the story, then naturally no one will criticize me. I had it all figured out, but the man in front of me had a slightly grim expression. After a long pause, he took a deep breath and said slowly, Gary is my godson, not my biological son. His last name is Chi. Huh? I stared at him, dumbfounded. Seeing his serious expression, not like he was joking, I had the absurd feeling of chasing a big scoop only to find out it was fake news. Chris looked up, his gaze falling on my face, somewhat helplessly. There have been a lot of people making baseless assumptions over the years, and I don't like to play up ships either. So I just let them be. Gary is my godson anyway, so it's not entirely a fabrication, and I couldn't be bothered to deal with it. I thought back carefully. No wonder Gary didn't look much like him. But because the little guy was also very cute, I didn't think in that direction. Then, that young man living in his house taking care of Gary. Could it be that he's gay? Otherwise, why would a young man adopt a godson? I think I've stumbled upon a massive scoop. Chris seemed to sense my thoughts, and his face darkened. The one who was taking care of Gary before is his biological uncle, also from the booths. He's just too much of a mess. His family cut off his cards, so he had no choice but to stay with me temporarily and take care of Gary. I said, oh. I don't know any of the booths. But that being said, Chris is still straight. The huge scoop, poof, gone again. Seeing my disappointed expression, Chris chuckled in exasperation, then his eyes suddenly glinted, and he said softly, however, I can give you a big scoop. Hearing this, I was both surprised and delighted. Really? Chris stared straight at me, his lips curving upwards. Of course, you'll know later. Since Chris still had a lot to deal with, I went home first to wait for his so-called big scoop. But before the scoop arrived, I saw that the person who had previously exposed my identity was being sued by Chris. Looking at the news, a warm feeling suddenly spread through my heart. It turned out that what I heard on the phone earlier was him hiring a lawyer to handle it for me. But his lawsuit immediately attracted the attention of many fans. A bunch of people were commenting below. Why are you even helping a paparazzi? Something's not right here, I'll hold my judgment and see. Bro, if you've been kidnapped, post a period. Just as everyone was discussing heatedly, Chris suddenly replied to my previous statement. Laugh it off, I'm not. Chris, you are. As soon as this message came out, it shot to the top of the trending topics within half an hour. Chris's kid's mom. The paparazzi netizens were roasting all night is actually Chris' real wife. Chris's fans' friendly fire. A series of hashtags successively occupied the top spots. I was completely dumbfounded. This was the big scoop Chris was talking about. He's treating me like a total idiot. I angrily prepared to call Chris. As I was scrolling through my call history, I unexpectedly discovered that, at some point, he was already in my contacts. Could it be, from when he took my phone earlier? Before that thought could fully sink in, Hannah sent me a message first. A very insincere one. Judy, honey, there was a bit of a misunderstanding about you at the company. If you're still interested in working, you can come back. Work my butt. I'm going to sue Chris for defamation, make him pay me some money, and then I'll just chill for the rest of my life. I dialed his number. The phone rang for a few seconds before it was picked up. On the other end, the man's pleasant voice came through the line, deep and melodious. Is your quota met now? If not, I can still cooperate. We can even make it real. The words "pay me" got stuck in my throat, unable to come out. This was the scoop I wanted. But I didn't expect this scoop to be about myself. Judging by his tone, he sounded quite sincere. I suspected he was deliberately messing with me, but I had no proof. I could only swallow my anger. Thanks, but no thanks. After a long pause, I heard him sigh, as if in regret. It must be my imagination. Because of Chris's explanation, I transformed from a malicious paparazzi into his official girlfriend. But I still timidly went to work. However, things were much better than before. My video channel on the platform gained some fans. I updated daily with photos and short videos of Chris, and I actually saved up some money. Chris let me film him and occasionally even cooked for me. He knew how to make a lot of dishes. After eating at his place for a month, I gained a solid 5 pounds. Another day, I picked Gary up and brought him home. As soon as I walked in, I saw Chris coming out in a bathrobe, looking like he had just showered, his black hair still wet. Gary's eyes darted around, and he quickly said, "I'm going to do my homework." With that, the little guy scurried away. Only Chris and I were left in the living room. His bathrobe was open at the collar, revealing his firm chest muscles. Water droplets dripped from his hair, landing on his chest and sliding into his robe. I inexplicably felt parched. Why don't you change your clothes at home?" Chris glanced coolly at my face and said casually, "What clothes should I change into at home? There are no outsiders here." "What do you mean, no outsiders? Am I not an outsider?" I wanted to argue, but my heart, embarrassingly, started to beat faster. Just as I was at a loss, a shadow suddenly fell over me, and a deep voice came from above, "Judy, do you really have no feelings for me?" His warm breath fanned my ear, and the tip of my ear burned. Who could resist this? My mind was racing a bit. I looked up slightly into his restrained eyes, my heart skipped a beat, and I asked in a low voice, "Are you serious?" The moment the words fell, he didn't make a sound. Just when I thought he would say something like he was joking, I saw him walk towards the coffee table, take out his ID from the wallet on it, and say, "If you're willing, we can go get our marriage license tomorrow. It's too late today, the city hall is closed." Chris and I had a flash marriage. They say impulsiveness is the devil. But I still went for it. When I held the freshly printed red booklet, I still couldn't quite believe it. Did I really marry Chris? Then in the future, wouldn't I have endless gossip to enjoy? Thinking of this, I couldn't help but laugh out loud. Beside me, Chris didn't know what I was laughing about, but a smile also spread across his lips. I suddenly remembered something and quickly asked, "By the way, why don't Gary's biological parents take care of him?" At the mention of this, Chris fell silent for a moment before saying, "His mother left when he was very young. His father is in a very bad emotional state and isn't in the mood to take care of him. He almost attempted suicide with him several times. My relationship with his father is okay, so I took him in to raise." I didn't expect it to be like this and was speechless for a moment. Seeing this, Chris stroked my hair and said gently, "It's okay. If you want, you can be his godmother." I thought of Gary's sparkling eyes. Okay. Getting an adorable kid painlessly is pretty awesome, right? That night, at Chris's clear suggestion, I moved into his house. After washing up, I climbed into bed, closed my eyes, and pretended to be asleep. Suddenly, I felt the mattress dip beside me. The temperature in the room seemed to be rising. Before I could open my eyes, I was pinned down. A light kiss landed on the corner of my lips. My eyelashes fluttered, and I slowly opened my eyes, just in time to meet the man's desire-filled gaze. "Chris, Chris." His Adam's apple bobbed, his voice slightly hoarse. Although I was shy, my hands, embarrassingly, had already found their way to his abs. So hard. Satisfied? My face flushed bright red, and I nodded haphazardly. Seeing this, Chris lowered his head, a low chuckle escaping his throat, and whispered in my ear, "There's even better." I felt like I was caught in a tide, submerged by wave after wave of sensuality. It wasn't until I was completely exhausted that he pulled me into his arms. A warm kiss landed on my forehead. "Sleep, wife." Chris quietly watched the person sleeping soundly in his arms, his expression softening. The person who had captured his heart in his youth, he hadn't been able to forget even after so many years. He thought he was fated to never be with her in this life. But he never expected that fate would still favor him. After all the twists and turns, she still came to his side, and they reunited.